Hello there, time for another little talk on medieval Iceland because it is truly a fascinating society worth looking into. Alright, so we're going to talk about what the economical situation in Iceland was like and what possibilities people had to get rich. So we should start by saying that medieval Iceland was quite a different society than in Europe, where the feudal system dominated for a long time. But that is not to say that it was egalitarian either. That's a misconception you hear a lot. Of course, the system was more egalitarian than in many other societies, but they didn't really live, happily in a commune or something. There were possibilities to become richer for a broader category of people, that's also true, but there also developed a, let's say, more well-off class, although this is not to be confused with the nobility in Europe. It has to do a lot with the conditions of political economy on this island. A basic fact about medieval Iceland, about Viking Iceland as well, is that the income a chieftain received from performing governmental duties, well, governmental is a little far-fetched to say, was little and irregular, too irregular to explain how successful leaders, local leaders, chieftains, amassed their wealth, necessary to several things: to purchase support from farmers, to exchange gifts, to make loans, as well as to organize feasts and provide hospitality, which was a pretty big thing in the northern world. In early Iceland, the methods by which land was acquired was quite predatory. It's also important to note that. More than in other societies with better resources and many other opportunities, an increase in the size of an individual's lands often depended on being able to take the neighbor's property. Consequently, the success of one Icelander usually meant the impoverishment of others. So how did these chieftains, these local bosses, grow their wealth? Well, they had several opportunities which were not available to others. This privileged income, let's say, included revenues generated by some few taxes, as well as profits from carrying out official services. Then there were also advantages from the right to set prices on imported goods. But in the same time, there were also possibilities available to all free men to get a little bit of wealth, such as renting your land. Well, several items are fundamental to understanding how Iceland worked economically and politically. One would be that a tax designed specifically to maintain leaders was not imposed until near the end of the Free State, so approximately at the time when Norway actually asserted dominance on the island. So we have a levy called Sauðakvöð or Sauðatollur, that's the sheep tax. It is mentioned several times in the Sturlunga saga, and it seems to have been a rather forced tax than a regularly collected one. Another factor would be that the introduction of this kind of tax on farmers, as well as the aggressive attitude that some chieftains, or goðar as they are called in Icelandic, took against foreign merchants at the time, might have also had to do with the general economic conditions in Europe. So not only with the contemporary conditions in Iceland. Around 1200, when these Icelandic leaders were becoming more greedy and ruthless, Europe was also in a pretty bad state, as it was experiencing a wave of inflation. Another important factor is that Icelanders never had a sufficient or stable source of silver to replenish the metals brought by the first settlers. So over the years, the ones traveling and the ones with successful trading businesses brought to the islands new supplies of silver, but by the end of the 11th century, the reserve seems to have been reduced quite sharply. So from the earliest times, Icelanders tried to substitute commodities for silver, and they also developed a couple of mediums of exchange. So for example, livestock, woolen cloth, dairy products as well, and particularly homespun cloth, the so-called vaðmál, which replaced silver as a more common unit of exchange, with each grade equivalent to a particular weight of silver. The principal monetary unit was the lögaurir, the law ounce, which equaled 6 ells of homespun cloth, with an ell being a measure something like 50 centimeters, about that. The ratio of this law ounce to an ounce of silver varied from 8 to 1 in the 11th century to 6 to 1 in the 13th century. So prices of goods were calculated in standardized ounces, whose values were set in the assemblies in springtime. But usually the standardized ounce was equal to 3 or 4 ells of this homespun cloth. Not to forget that the Icelandic economy was to a great extent dictated by the climate and the nature of the land. So we have a very variable climate, as the island is located between 2 air masses. We have a short growing season at Iceland's northern latitude, limited to vegetation such as grass, mosses, lichens, and also wood became a very scarce commodity. Birch, which was the only tree growing naturally in medieval Iceland, was kind of twisted because of the constantly changing temperature. The settlers who arrived here in the 900s found an advantage in the absence of dense forests because, the land was easier to clear. And this scrub birch also offered a supply of fuel. The grasses and shrubs, on the other hand, were very suitable for farming, but the problems were not long in coming, and very soon the population seems to have reached the limits of what the land could support, and overgrazing caused some pretty serious and irreversible erosion. I also have a short video about how these settlers caused irreparable damage to Icelandic nature. You might want to check that out as well. The settlers also did not develop any significant farming technology to increase productivity of the habitable areas along the coast and in the valleys. Although some farmers, especially in the south, did cultivate cereal crops, barley for example, on a small scale, the summer growing season was unfortunately too short. Instead, the farmers, or bændur as they were called, became pastoralists, raising livestock, producing dairy products above all else, which meant that the harvesting of hay was vital in order to feed as many sheep and cattle as possible during the long winter. And in fact, numerous stories in the sagas tell us of quarrels over especially fertile meadows and their harvests. Alright, so now that we have a little bit of background information, I will continue next time with an explanation on what the sources of wealth consisted of for both people in general and for chieftains, so local bosses in particular. So make sure to subscribe and support my channel, and follow me for the next video.